Melissa didn't believe in ghosts, until the night she saw 10 men in black suits standing at her father's grave. Rain doesn't wash away the dead. It only makes them harder to ignore. 3 days of rain. 3 days of water hammering the streets until New Orleans felt like it was drowning. Melissa's sneakers were soaked through by the time she reached Cypress Hill Cemetery, her fingers numb with cold. She didn't care. The dead didn't mind the rain. 13 years since the fire that took her father. 13 years since the police called it an accident. Faulty wiring in a mechanic's shop. Robert Myers, 45. A good man who fixed cars and came home smelling like motor oil and kept his head down. 15 then, 28 now, still waiting for answers. At least, that's what she'd been told. Melissa climbed the hill toward his grave, hood pulled tight. She came every year on October 27th, but never this late. Twilight was fading, pulling shadows long across the headstones. She should have brought flowers. Then she saw them. 10 men in black surrounded her father's grave like sentinels. Behind them, 3 black SUVs idled with engines humming, headlights cutting through rain like prison searchlights. At the center, one man knelt in the wet grass, his gloved hand resting against the stone that read Robert Myers, 1,958-2012. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She ducked behind a marble angel, pressing her back against cold stone, breath coming too fast. This wasn't random mourners, this was ritual. The kneeling man rose slowly, water dripping from his slicked back hair, tall, 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than her yearly rent. Even from a distance, she could see the stillness in his posture that didn't match the storm. Like he was the eye of it. He placed something white on the gravestone. A rose, then an envelope. He spoke. Low, reverent, almost tender. But the rain swallowed his words. Italian, maybe. A prayer or a confession. When he finished, he touched 2 fingers to his lips, then pressed them to the top of the headstone. The gesture so intimate it made her chest ache. All 10 men bowed their heads in unison. 30 seconds, maybe less. Then, without a word, they dispersed. Engines purred to life. The convoy rolled into darkness, red taillights bleeding into rain until nothing remained but silence. Melissa waited. 5 minutes. 10. Her legs trembled from cold and adrenaline, but she stayed hidden until she was certain they were gone. Then she ran. Her sneakers slipped on wet grass as she stumbled to the grave, chest heaving. The white rose lay perfectly centered, already soaked. Beside it, the envelope. Thick, cream-colored paper with her father's name in elegant script. Robert Myers. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Heavy. Expensive. Inside, bundled stacks of $100 bills. So many she couldn't count them. Thousands. Maybe more. And tucked between the bills, a card. Is greater than debt paid. Forgive me. Is greater than D.P. You shouldn't be here, Melissa. She spun, nearly dropping everything. He stood less than 10 feet away. The man from the grave. She had no idea how he'd approached without sound. No footsteps, no breath, nothing. Taller up close. Mid-30s, with dark eyes that caught the faint glow of distant streetlights. Not quite brown, not quite black. Something in between that looked almost predatory in the shadows. Everyone in New Orleans knew the face of Dario Pelosi, Mafia heir, Gulf South kingpin, the man whose name made police chiefs lower their voices, and he was standing at her father's grave like he belonged there. Who the hell are you? Her voice came out sharper than she felt. Someone who owed your father everything. He stepped closer. Slow, deliberate, hands loose at his sides. Unarmed maybe, or confident enough not to draw. The rain plastered his shirt to his chest, and she could see the lean muscle beneath. The way he moved like violence was always an option. I came to pay a debt. With money? She held up the envelope, anger cutting through fear. You think this fixes anything? No. His voice was quiet, steady, like calm water over sharp rocks. But it's all I have left to give. Then you didn't know him at all. Something flickered across his face. Regret, or something darker that made her pulse kick. I knew him better than you think. Melissa's throat tightened. My father was a mechanic. He fixed cars. He didn't know people like you. He saved people like me." Dario's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath Rain, slicked skin. 13 years ago, your father took a bullet meant for my chest. He bled out in my arms while I called for help that came too late. 2 days later, his shop burned. And I've spent every year since trying to figure out how to repay a man who's already gone." The world tilted. "You're lying." "I wish I was." He reached into his jacket. She tensed. But he only pulled out a business card. Plain, white, embossed lettering, D. Pelosi, private consulting, and an address in the warehouse district. "When you're ready to know the truth," he said quietly, his voice like smoke curling through her defenses, "come find me." "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't." He turned toward the last remaining SUV. Before getting in, he looked back, and the weight of his gaze made her skin flush despite the cold. "But you will. Because you've been asking questions about your father's death for 5 years. You won't stop now." Ice flooded her veins. "How do you know that?" "I know everything that matters." The door closed with a soft thunk. The engine started, and he drove away, leaving her alone with a dead man's grave and $100,000 she didn't understand. Melissa stood there, rain soaking through her jacket, staring at the card in her hand. DP. Dario Pelosi. The man who ruled New Orleans from the shadows. The man who knelt at her father's grave like a penitent. The man who claimed her father, had saved his life. She looked down at the envelope, at the white rose already wilting in the rain, and she knew she'd be walking into his office within days, because he was right about one thing. She wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Welcome back, my beautiful souls. Before we step into tonight's story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing where my kindred hearts are watching from. Every click, every comment, every whisper of support keeps this world of love, danger, and obsession alive. So, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let me pull you into a story you won't want to escape. 2 days later, Melissa sat in her cramped apartment above the diner where she worked double shifts, the envelope still unopened on her kitchen table. She'd Googled Dario Pelosi 17 times, found nothing useful, just shadows and rumors and one grainy photo from a charity gala 3 years ago. But it was the card she kept staring at, the address, the invitation she couldn't refuse. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and occasional footsteps from above. She'd lived here 3 years, longest she'd stayed anywhere since her father died. Thin walls, leaking sink. But it was hers. Until now. She opened her laptop again. Dario Pelosi's name yielded the same results. Real estate holdings. Silent partner in 3 restaurants. A donation to the children's hospital. Nothing criminal. Nothing concrete. Just the kind of clean record that took serious money and power to maintain. The white rose sat in a glass on the windowsill, already browning. She didn't know why she'd kept it. Sentiment, maybe. Or evidence. Her phone buzzed against the table, vibrating loud enough to make her jump. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello? Silence. Just breathing. Slow, deliberate, like whoever it was wanted her to know they were there. Who is this? Stay away from him, girl. The voice was male, older, with a thick Cajun accent. Some debts drowned the payee. Her pulse spiked. What are you talking about? Dario Pelosi ain't the hero you think he is. Your daddy died because of him, not for him. You keep digging, you'll end up in the same hole. The line went dead. Melissa sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, heart hammering. She checked the number. Blocked. Untraceable. Whoever it was knew about the cemetery. Knew about Dario. Knew about her. She crossed to the window, peering down at the street below. Rain had started again, turning pavement slick under streetlights. A few cars passed. A couple hurried by under an umbrella, except the black sedan parked across the street. Engine running, headlights off, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. It hadn't been there an hour ago. Melissa backed away, pulse racing. She grabbed her jacket and shoved the envelope into her bag along with the business card. Her hands shook as she locked the door and took the back stairs to the alley. She walked fast, head down, cutting through side streets she knew by heart. Twice she glanced over her shoulder. No one, just rain and darkness and distant Bourbon Street neon bleeding into the sky. By the time she reached the diner, her chest ached from breathing too hard. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, the air too warm. Marcy stood behind the counter, wiping down the coffee station. "You look like hell, baby." "I feel worse." Melissa slid onto a stool and dropped her bag. "Can I get coffee?" "Strong." Marcy poured without asking questions. She set the mug down and leaned against the counter. "You in some kind of trouble?" "I don't know yet." "That mean yes." Marcy's eyes narrowed. "This about your daddy?" Melissa wrapped her hands around the mug, letting heat seep into her palms. "Someone left money on his grave. A lot of it. And now someone else is telling me to stay away from the man who left it." Marcy went still. "How much money?" $100,000. The older woman exhaled slowly. "Jesus, girl, that ain't kindness, that's guilt. Or a trap. Same thing sometimes." Marcy glanced toward the window, then back. "You gonna give it back?" "I'm going to find out why he left it. That's what I was afraid of." Marcy reached under the counter and pulled out a notepad, scribbling before tearing off the page. "My cousin works security at one of them fancy clubs downtown. Dolce Inferno. Word is, Dario Pelosi owns it. You want answers, that's where you'll find him." Melissa took the paper. The address was in the French Quarter. Close enough to walk, close enough to be stupid. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Marcy's voice softened. "Your daddy was a good man, Melissa. But good men don't get $100,000 funerals unless they were mixed up in something bad. You go poking around, you better be ready for what you find." Melissa left 20 minutes later, the address in her pocket and the envelope still heavy in her bag. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and empty, the kind of quiet that felt like the city was holding its breath. The black sedan was gone. But when she climbed the stairs and unlocked her door, the white rose was lying on her kitchen table, no longer in the glass, but laid flat. Petals scattered like a warning. She hadn't left it that way. Melissa stood in the doorway, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she didn't. She stepped inside, locked the door, and stared at the rose until her hands stopped shaking. Then she pulled out Dario Pelosi's card and made her decision. Dolce Inferno sat on Chartres and Toulouse like a jewel box wrapped in shadow. Pre-war architecture with wrought iron balconies and tall windows glowing amber from inside. A velvet rope stretched across the entrance, guarded by two men who looked like they bench-pressed motorcycles for fun. Melissa stood across the street, hands shoved in her jacket pockets, trying to summon nerve. She dressed better than usual. Dark jeans, fitted black shirt, her only boots without scuff marks. It still wasn't enough. She looked like exactly what she was. A girl from the wrong side of the city, about to walk into a place where people paid more for champagne than she made in a month. But she'd come this far. She crossed the street. The bouncers watched her approach with blank expressions that said they'd already decided she didn't belong. She stopped in front of them, heart pounding, and forced herself to meet their eyes. "I need to see Dario Pelosi." The taller one smirked. "You got an appointment?" "No. But he knows who I am." "Sure he does, sweetheart. So does half the city." He gestured toward the street. "Move along." Melissa pulled the business card from her pocket and held it up. "He gave me this, 2 days ago, at Cypress Hill Cemetery." The smirk faded. The two men exchanged a glance. Silent, quick. Then the shorter one pulled out a phone, turned away, and spoke too quietly for her to hear. 30 seconds later, he nodded and stepped aside. "Third floor. Private elevator at the back." Inside, the club was everything she'd expected and worse. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across velvet booths and marble floors. The air smelled like expensive whiskey and something darker. Gun oil, maybe. Music thrummed low through hidden speakers, something instrumental and haunting that made the whole place feel like a cathedral built for sin. People moved through the space like they owned it. No one looked at her. She was invisible here, the way poor people always were in places built for the rich. She found the elevator at the back, past the bar. The doors opened immediately when she pressed the button, as if the building had been waiting. The ride up felt too fast. When the doors opened, She stepped into silence and control. Dark wood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the French Quarter. A single desk at the far end, backlit by city lights. And behind it, Dario Pelosi. He stood when she entered, hands resting lightly on the desk, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body. He looked different here. Less like the man who'd knelt in rain, and more like the kingpin everyone whispered about. Calm, composed, dangerous in the way a loaded gun was dangerous, even when it wasn't pointed at you. You came. His voice was quiet, almost pleased, and the sound of it made something low in her stomach tighten. You knew I would. I hoped. He gestured toward the chair. Sit. I'll stand. A flicker of something. Amusement, maybe. Crossed his face. Suit yourself. Melissa stayed where she was, arms crossed, trying to ignore the way her pulse kicked every time his eyes met hers. You said my father saved your life. I want the truth, all of it. Dario studied her for a long moment, then moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy that made her think of expensive hotels and old money. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the way his eyes tracked her breathing. 13 years ago, he said quietly. I was 23, stupid, arrogant. My father had just died, and I inherited an empire I wasn't ready for. There were men in my organization who thought I was too young to lead. One of them decided to solve that problem with a bullet. He paused, jaw tightening, the muscle there jumping beneath skin. Your father was working late at his shop. Wrong place, wrong time. He saw them drag me into the alley behind his building. He could have walked away, should have, but he didn't. He came out with a tire iron and a cell phone, and he stood between me and 3 men with guns. Melissa's throat tightened. What happened? He got shot, twice, once in the shoulder, once in the chest. Dario's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. I killed the men who did it, but your father bled out before the ambulance arrived. He died because I wasn't strong enough to protect myself. And the fire? His eyes darkened. Something feral moving behind them. Retaliation. The men who wanted me dead had allies. They burned his shop 2 days later to send a message. Your father's name was collateral damage. The police never connected the fire to the shooting, he added quietly. They called it faulty wiring. It was easier that way. The room spun. Melissa grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd died because he'd saved a man who brought violence like a shadow. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice cracked. Why leave money on his grave like some kind of transaction? Because I didn't know how else to say I'm sorry. Dario stepped closer, and she could feel the heat of him now, the way his presence seemed to fill the space between them. I've spent 13 years trying to repay a debt I can never settle. The money was all I had left. I don't want your money. I know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, setting it on the desk between them. But you should take this. Melissa unfolded it. A list of names, dates, addresses, all handwritten in neat, precise script. What is this? Everyone who was involved in your father's death. Dario's voice was cold now, stripped of emotion. Some are dead. Some are in prison. One is still walking free. Her eyes snapped up. Who? Someone close to me. Someone I trusted. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, and the movement pulled his shirt tight across his chest. And someone who knows you have that envelope now. Ice flooded her veins. The phone call. You've been followed since you left the cemetery. I've had men watching you to make sure nothing happens, but they can't be everywhere. He pushed off the desk and moved toward the window, hands in his pockets. You're in danger, Melissa. Real danger. And it's my fault. Then tell me who it is. I will. But first, you need to understand something. He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten, made her want to step closer and run away all at once. Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. You'll be part of this world whether you want to be or not. And people in my world don't get to walk away. Melissa's hands clenched into fists. I stopped being safe the moment you knelt at my father's grave. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Searching, calculating, like he was trying to decide if she was brave or reckless. Then he nodded. His name is Vince Rinaldi. He was my father's right hand, and now he's mine. Or he was, until I started finding discrepancies in the books. Money moving where it shouldn't. Shipments that didn't match manifests. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, then handed it to her. Your father wasn't just a mechanic, Melissa. He was an informant. He was feeding information to the FBI about my organization. The phone screen showed a scanned document, an official report with her father's name at the top. Her hands shook. No, that's not, he wouldn't. He would, and he did, because he thought he was doing the right thing. Dario's voice softened, and something about the gentleness of it made her want to scream. He was trying to protect you, Vince found out, and he made sure your father never got the chance to testify. The room tilted. Melissa handed the phone back, unable to look anymore. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth, and because Vince knows you're asking questions. He'll come for you, Melissa. And when he does, I can't stop him unless you let me help. She laughed. Sharp, bitter. Help? You've done enough. I know. He stepped closer, and this time she didn't move away. This time she felt the pull of him. Magnetic, dangerous, impossible to resist. But I'm asking anyway. Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened behind her. Dario's expression shifted, calm to cold in an instant. His hand moved to his waist, and Melissa realized he was armed. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a scar across his left cheek. He smiled when he saw them, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dario, didn't know you had company. Vince. Dario's voice was flat. We were just finishing. Vince's gaze slid to Melissa, lingering too long, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. This, the mechanic's daughter? Her blood turned to ice. Dario moved between them. Subtle, but unmistakable. She's leaving. Shame. Vince's smile widened. Would have liked to get to know her. Hear what Robert used to tell her about us. Melissa's pulse roared in her ears. This was him, the man who'd killed her father, standing 10 feet away, smiling like they were old friends. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to accuse something, but Dario's hand caught her wrist, firm and unyielding. Go, he said quietly, eyes locked on hers. Now. She wanted to argue, wanted to stay and watch Vince's face when she called him a murderer. But something in Dario's expression stopped her. So she left. The elevator ride down felt like falling. When the doors opened, she stumbled out into the club, past chandeliers and velvet and people who didn't know her father had died saving a monster. She made it 3 steps outside before hands grabbed her from behind. A van door slid open. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth and the world went dark. Then gunfire. 3 shots. Quick, precise. The hands released her. She hit the pavement hard, ears ringing, and looked up to see 2 of Dario's men standing over the bodies of her attackers. One of them offered her a hand. Boss says you're coming with us. Melissa took it. Because she didn't have a choice anymore. She was already drowning. The mansion sat 20 minutes outside the city, hidden behind wrought iron gates and oak trees so old their branches formed tunnels over the driveway. Melissa watched it approach through the tinted window, hands still shaking from adrenaline. No one had spoken since they'd pulled her off the pavement. Just silence and the engine's hum and the weight of what had almost happened pressing on her chest. When they stopped, one of the men opened her door and gestured for her to get out. Inside, the house was everything her apartment wasn't. Marble floors, high ceilings, chandeliers that looked stolen from a palace. The air smelled like wood polish and old money, and every surface gleamed, beautiful, suffocating. Dario stood in the foyer, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked different without the armor of the suit. Still dangerous, but more human. Tired. And when his eyes found hers, something in his expression cracked. Are you hurt? His eyes scanned her face, dropped to her scraped palms. I'm fine. You're not. He nodded toward one of his men. Get the first aid kit. I said I'm fine. Her voice came out sharper than intended. What the hell just happened? You were almost kidnapped. My men lost track of you when you left through the back alley of the diner, he said, frustration threading his voice. Vince moved faster than any of us expected. Dario crossed to the bar and poured 2 glasses of something amber. He brought one to her, pressing it into her hand, his fingers brushing hers in a way that sent heat up her arm. Drink. She didn't argue. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her hands. Who were they? Vince's men. He moves fast when he's threatened. Dario drained his own glass in one swallow. You confronted him in my office. That made you a liability. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. He saw you. That was enough. He set the glass down and turned to face her, arms crossed. You can't go home, Melissa. Not tonight. Not until I deal with this. Deal with it how? However I have to. The room felt smaller suddenly, walls pressing in. She set her glass on the table and stood. I'm not staying here. You don't have a choice. Like hell I don't. She moved toward the door, but he stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, see the pulse jumping in his throat. You walk out that door, you're dead by morning. Is that what you want? What I want is to not be in this situation at all. Her voice cracked. I want my father back. I want my life back. I want. She stopped, because none of it mattered. Her father was dead. Her life had been a lie. And the man standing in front of her was the reason for all of it. Dario's expression softened. I know. You don't know anything. I know what it's like to lose someone and spend the rest of your life wishing you could have saved them. He stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. Stay. Just for tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Melissa wanted to argue. Wanted to storm out and prove she didn't need his protection. But her legs ached, her hands still shook, and the thought of going back to her apartment, where someone had already broken in once, made her stomach turn. So she nodded. One night, then she'd leave. By midnight, she couldn't sleep. The room Dario had given her was twice the size of her entire apartment. King-sized bed, ensuite bathroom, windows overlooking the garden. It should have been comfortable, should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like a cage. She wandered downstairs, barefoot, following the faint sound of music. It led her to a study at the back of the house, the door half open. Inside, Dario sat at a desk covered in papers, glass of whiskey in one hand, pen in the other. Jazz played softly from a speaker. Something slow and melancholy that made the room feel like a confessional. He looked up when she knocked. Can't sleep? His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of the command it usually carried. Can you? Not for years. He gestured to the chair across from him. Come in. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The study was smaller than the rest of the house, more personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, legal textbooks, old novels. A photo sat on the desk. A younger Dario with an older man who had the same sharp jawline. Your father? She asked. He glanced at the photo, then back at his papers. Yeah, you look like him. I know. He set the pen down and leaned back in his chair. He built this empire from nothing. Came here with $5 and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. By the time he died, he owned half the Gulf Coast. Do you miss him? Every day. Dario's jaw tightened. And I hate him for it. Melissa sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. Why? Because he left me with a kingdom I never asked for and enemies I can't kill fast enough. He picked up his glass, staring into it. I was supposed to be a lawyer. Did you know that? Full ride to Tulane. Was going to do corporate law, make money the boring way. Then my father got shot, and suddenly I was responsible for 200 men who die without leadership. You could have walked away. No, I couldn't. He drained the glass. Because the people who killed him would have come for me next, and then everyone who worked for him. Walking away would have been a death sentence for all of us. Melissa studied him. This man who knelt at graves and ran an empire and looked more exhausted than dangerous in the dim light. Is that why you tried to go legitimate? His eyes snapped to hers. How did you? You said it earlier, at the club, that you were trying to clean up the empire. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her knees. Were you? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he stood and crossed to the window, hands in his pockets. I've been trying for 5 years, sold off the drug operations, shut down the gambling rings, focused on real estate and import-export that actually follow the law. He laughed, bitter, humorless. But you can't scrub blood off your hands, Melissa. Not when it's been there this long. My father thought you could. He turned. What? He wouldn't have saved you if he thought you were beyond redemption. She stood, closing the distance between them, drawn by something she didn't want to name. He was a good judge of character. If he saw something in you worth protecting, then maybe it's still there. Dario stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. I don't deserve that kind of faith. Maybe not. But you have it anyway. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither knew how to say. Outside, wind rustled through oak trees, and somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 1. Finally, Dario spoke. There's something you need to see. He crossed to the desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to her. Inside, a news clipping from 3 days ago. Her photo. The headline read, Local woman questioned in money laundering investigation linked to deceased father. Her stomach dropped. What is this? Vince's next move. He's framing you for crimes your father supposedly committed. By tomorrow, the police will have a warrant for your arrest. That's... Her voice failed. That's not possible. He hesitated then, the mask slipping just enough for her to see exhaustion beneath control. For a heartbeat, he looked less like a kingpin and more like a man trying and failing to protect what little was left of his conscience. It is when you have the right people in the right places. Dario's expression was grim. He's using you to get to me. If you're arrested, you'll talk. If you talk, you'll expose things that could bring down my entire organization. And if that happens, you'll kill me. No. The word came fast, almost angry, and the ferocity of it made her breath catch. I'd die before I let anyone hurt you. But Vince doesn't know that. He thinks you're a loose end I'll tie off myself. Melissa sank into the chair, the folder slipping from her hands. What am I supposed to do? Dario knelt in front of her, his eyes level with hers, so close she could see gold flecks in the dark. Marry me. She laughed, a shocked, broken sound. What? A contract marriage. Legal protection. If you're my wife, you can't be forced to testify against me. And Vince can't touch you without declaring war. He reached for her hands, holding them gently, his thumbs tracing circles over her knuckles in a way that made her shiver. It's the only way to keep you safe. You're insane, probably. He didn't smile. But I'm also right. Melissa pulled her hands away, standing so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I'm not marrying you. I don't even know you. You know enough. I know you're the reason my father's dead. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Dario rose slowly, his expression unreadable. You're right, I am. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that. But right now, the only thing standing between you and a bullet is my name. So I'm asking you, begging you, to take it. She wanted to say no. Wanted to walk out and take her chances with the police, with Vince, with whatever came next. But the look in his eyes stopped her. Not pleading, not desperate, just honest, raw, and terrifyingly sincere. He meant it. Every word. How long? She asked finally. As long as it takes to dismantle Vince's operation and clear your name. He pulled a contract from the desk drawer, setting it on the surface between them. 6 months, maybe a year. After that, you're free. Melissa stared at the paper. Clean, official, terrifying in its simplicity. She thought about her apartment, her job at the diner, the life she'd built out of nothing and was about to lose. Then she thought about her father, bleeding out in an alley because he'd tried to save a stranger. Maybe that's what this was. Her version of stepping into the fire. She picked up the pen and signed. The toolbox sat in the back of her father's storage unit, buried under 12 years of accumulated grief. Melissa had avoided it for as long as she could remember. Avoided the way it smelled like motor oil and rust. Avoided the memories it carried of Saturday mornings spent watching him fix cars while she handed him wrenches she didn't know the names of. But now, standing in the dim fluorescent light of the storage facility, she couldn't avoid it anymore. 2 weeks had passed since she'd signed Dario's contract. The days had blurred. Quiet breakfasts, guarded conversations, and too many moments when she caught him watching her like he was measuring the distance between guilt and something softer. They'd kept their distance physically, but something between them had started to shift, silent and dangerous. 2 weeks of living in a mansion that felt more like a museum, of wearing a ring that weighed too much, of learning to exist in a world where danger wore expensive suits and smiled at dinner parties. The marriage had been quick. A judge, 2 witnesses, papers signed in an office that smelled like old coffee. No ceremony, no vows, just a transaction wrapped in legality and desperation. But Dario had kept his word. The police investigation had vanished overnight, the news articles scrubbed from the internet like they'd never existed. She was safe, protected, trapped. She'd asked for permission to visit the storage unit. Hated herself for asking, hated him for making her. But he'd agreed immediately. Sent 2 of his men to stand guard outside while she searched through the wreckage of her father's life. The toolbox opened with a metallic screech that echoed through the small space. Inside, wrenches and screwdrivers and socket sets, all organized with the kind of precision her father had brought to everything. She lifted the top tray, setting it aside, and froze. A USB drive, taped to the bottom of the box. Her hands shook as she peeled it free. Small, black, unremarkable, but her father had hidden it, which meant it mattered. She pocketed it and left without looking back. By the time she returned to the mansion, it was past midnight. The house was dark except for the light spilling from Dario's study, the same room where she'd agreed to this impossible arrangement. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers and ledgers, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened in a way that made her chest tighten. "Find anything?" She pulled the USB drive from her pocket and held it up. "My father left this. I need your computer." He didn't ask questions, just stood and gestured for her to take his seat. She plugged the drive in, hands trembling, and waited for it to load. The folder that appeared was labeled simply, Truth. Inside, spreadsheets, dozens of them, shipping manifests, financial transactions, names and dates and numbers that meant nothing at first glance. But as she scrolled, patterns emerged. Money moving through shell companies, shipments arriving at Gulf ports with incomplete paperwork, names she recognized from the news, politicians, business owners, people who were supposed to be legitimate, and at the center of it all, one name repeated over and over. Vince Rinaldi. "What is this?" she whispered. Dario leaned over her shoulder, reading, and his expression went cold. Fury barely contained beneath ice. "Evidence. Your father was documenting everything." "Documenting what?" "Human trafficking." His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "Vince has been running people through the ports for years, using my shipping routes to do it." He straightened, hands clenched into fists. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Melissa, I didn't know." She wanted to believe him, wanted to see the horror in his eyes as proof. But all she could see was the data on the screen, proof that her father had died trying to expose a monster, and that monster was still walking free. "There's more." She clicked on another file. This one was a journal, entries written in her father's handwriting, dated over 3 months before his death. "They're using the warehouses on Chupatula Street. I've seen the trucks coming in at night. Girls, young, terrified. I don't know where they're taking them, but it's not for work. I tried talking to Dario. He didn't believe me. Said Vince would never betray him like that. But I know what I saw. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. If something happens to me, the evidence is in the toolbox. Tell Melissa I'm sorry I couldn't protect her from this." The words blurred. Melissa sat back, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. Her father hadn't been a victim. He'd been a hero. And she'd spent 13 years believing he'd died for nothing. Dario's hand settled on her shoulder. Warm, steady, grounding in a way that made her want to lean into it and push away all at once. "I'm sorry. Don't." She shook him off, standing so fast the chair skidded backward. "Don't apologize. Don't." Her voice broke. "He tried to tell you, and you didn't listen." I know. You got him killed. I know. His voice cracked, just barely, but she heard it, felt it in the air between them. I know, and I've hated myself for it every day since. But he didn't die for nothing, Melissa. He left you this because he knew you'd finish what he started. She turned to face him, anger and grief warring in her chest. How? How am I supposed to finish this? I'm not a cop. I'm not an investigator. I'm just... You're his daughter. Dario stepped closer. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And you're braver than you think. I'm terrified. Good. That means you're smart. He reached past her, clicking through the files until he found one labeled Contacts. A list of names. FBI agents, journalists, lawyers. Your father built a network. People who believed him when no one else did. We use them. We expose Vince. And we make sure your father's death meant something. Melissa stared at the screen, then at Dario. Why are you helping me? Because I should have helped him. He turned away, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense with the weight of guilt. I spent 5 years trying to clean up my father's empire, and I was so focused on the big picture, I missed what was happening right under my nose. Vince played me, used my trust to build his own kingdom, and your father paid the price. So this is about guilt. It's about doing the right thing. He looked back at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something raw in his expression. Not the kingpin, not the protector, just a man who'd failed someone he respected, even if it's too late. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Melissa's pulse thrummed in her throat, from anger, from fear, from something else she didn't want to name. Something that made her acutely aware of how close he was standing, how the lamplight caught the sharp planes of his face, how his eyes kept dropping to her mouth before snapping back up. What happens after? Her voice was barely a whisper. After we expose Vince. After all of this is over. You get your life back. Dario's jaw tightened. The contract ends. You walk away. And I make sure no one ever comes near you again. Just like that? Just like that. She searched his face for a lie, for some hidden agenda. But all she found was exhaustion and something that looked dangerously close to resignation and longing, barely masked, burning just beneath the surface. I need air. She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. Melissa. She turned. Your father would be proud of you. The words hit her like a physical blow. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and left. She found herself in the garden behind the mansion, where oak trees formed a canopy so thick moonlight barely penetrated. The air smelled like jasmine and rain-soaked earth, and for the first time in weeks, she could breathe without feeling like the walls were closing in. She sat on a stone bench near the fountain, the USB drive still clutched in her hand. Her father's words echoed in her head. Tell Melissa I'm sorry I couldn't protect her from this. But he had protected her. For 13 years she'd lived in ignorance, painful, suffocating ignorance. But ignorance that had kept her safe, until she'd opened that envelope, until she'd walked into Dario's world and refused to leave. Maybe that made her brave. Or maybe it just made her reckless. You shouldn't be out here alone. She didn't turn. She'd heard his footsteps on the gravel path, recognized the cadence of his walk. Dario sat beside her, far enough to give her space, close enough that she felt the warmth of him in the cool night air, close enough that she caught his scent, cedar and smoke, and something uniquely him that made her want to move closer. Your men are everywhere, she said. I'm not exactly alone. Still. He leaned back, tilting his head toward the sky. Vince is unpredictable when he's cornered. I'd rather not give him an opening. Is that what I am? An opening? You're a weakness. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was an obvious truth, and the rawness of it made her pulse spike. The moment I brought you into my home, I gave him leverage. He knows I'll burn the world down to keep you safe. Her breath caught. Why? Because I owe your father a debt I can never repay. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her chest tighten, made heat pool low in her belly. And because you remind me there's still something in this world worth protecting. The words hung between them, dangerous and honest. Melissa's heart hammered against her ribs. She should stand. Should put distance between them. should remember that this man was the reason her father was dead, that this marriage was a contract, that nothing about this was real. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. Because the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once, made her forget every reason she should walk away. Dario, don't. His voice was rough, strained. Don't say whatever you're about to say, because if you tell me you hate me, I'll believe you. And if you tell me you don't, I won't know what to do with it. I don't know what I feel. The admission cost her something, made her vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since her father died. I should hate you. I want to hate you. But when you look at me like that, She stopped, shaking her head. This is insane. I know. We barely know each other. I know. This isn't real. I know. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, let him trace circles over her knuckles with his thumb. A touch so gentle it made her ache. But it feels real, doesn't it? She couldn't answer, because he was right. Somewhere between the graveyard and the contract and the late nights in his study, something had shifted, the lines had blurred. And now she was sitting in a garden with a man who owned half the Gulf Coast, holding his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. We should go inside. She pulled away, standing before she could change her mind, before she could lean into him the way her body was begging her to. It's late. He stood too, but didn't follow. Just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. Melissa, don't. She backed toward the house, wrapping her arms around herself against the sudden cold his absence created. Whatever you're about to say, just don't. Not tonight. He nodded. But the look on his face, longing and restraint, and something that looked like pain, stayed with her long after she'd locked herself in her room. 3 days later, everything changed. Melissa had spent the morning decoding more of her father's files, cross-referencing shipping manifests with news reports of missing persons. The pattern was undeniable. Every 6 weeks, a container would arrive at the port of New Orleans. Every 6 weeks, women would disappear from bus stations and shelters across the Gulf Coast. And every 6 weeks, Vince Rinaldi's accounts would show a deposit of exactly $500,000. She was so focused on the data, she didn't hear Dario enter the study. I need you to see something. She looked up. His expression was grim, the kind of grim that made her pulse spike. What happened? He set his laptop on the desk, turning the screen toward her. A video player was paused on a grainy image, security footage from what looked like a warehouse. One of my men found this on Vince's private server. It's from 2 weeks ago. He pressed play. The footage showed a large room filled with shipping containers. Men moved between them, checking manifests, directing forklifts, standard warehouse operations. But then the camera angle shifted, and Melissa's blood ran cold. A container door opened. Inside, women. At least 20 of them, huddled together, eyes wide with terror. Vince walked into frame. He said something to one of the men, too far away for audio, and pointed at 3 of the women. They were pulled out, screaming, dragged toward a side door. The footage cut off. Melissa's stomach turned. She pushed away from the desk, hand over her mouth, trying not to be sick. How long has this been happening? Years, maybe longer. Dario's voice was ice, controlled fury that made the air around him feel charged. My father's operation was brutal, but it had rules. No drugs to kids. No human cargo. Vince convinced me he was following those rules, but he was building his own empire right under my nose. Where are they now? The women in that video? I don't know. He closed the laptop. But I'm going to find out. How? By making Vince think he's won. Dario pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. He's been asking for a meeting. Wants to discuss expanding operations. I'm going to give him what he wants. That's suicide. It's bait. He looked at her and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the chess player thinking 3 moves ahead. He thinks I'm weak, thinks marrying you was a mistake that made me soft. I'm going to let him keep thinking that. And when he makes his move, I'll be ready. Melissa's chest tightened. And what am I supposed to do? Sit here and wait? You're supposed to stay alive. He moved closer, his hands settling on her shoulders, thumbs brushing against her collarbone in a way that made her shiver. "Vince knows you have those files now. One of my men reported seeing surveillance equipment planted outside the storage unit. He's been watching you." "Then let him watch." She pulled away, anger flaring hot and bright. "I'm not hiding while you walk into a trap." "Melissa." "No." She turned on him, fists clenched. "My father died because he was brave enough to stand up to monsters. I'm not going to dishonor that by cowering in your mansion while you fight my battles. This isn't your battle." "Yes, it is." Her voice cracked. "It became my battle the moment you knelt at his grave, the moment you made me part of this world. You don't get to protect me now by shutting me out." They stood there, inches apart, the air between them crackling with tension. Dario's jaw worked, his eyes searching hers like he was trying to find an argument that would work. Finally, he exhaled. "If you're coming, you follow my rules. You don't leave my side. You don't make a move without my signal. And if things go wrong, they won't. If they do," he continued, voice hard, "you run. You don't look back. You don't try to save me, you just run." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't leave him to die, but the look on his face stopped her, not commanding, pleading. "Okay," she whispered. He nodded once, then pulled her into his arms. It wasn't romantic, wasn't gentle, just desperate and human and terrifyingly real. His heart pounded against her cheek, and she realized he was scared. Not for himself. For her. "I won't let anything happen to you," he murmured into her hair, his breath warm against her temple. "I know." But as she held him, breathing in the scent of his cologne and the faint smell of gun oil, she wondered if he knew how much danger he was in. Not from Vince, but from the way she was starting to feel about him. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the too-big bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through scenarios and outcomes and all the ways this could go wrong. Finally, she gave up and padded downstairs, following the faint glow of light from the study. Dario was there, as she knew he would be. Shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey in his hand and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Beautiful in the lamplight, dangerous in his stillness. "You should be resting," he said without looking up. "So should you." "Can't." He gestured to the papers spread across his desk. Too much to plan, too many variables. Melissa crossed to the desk, studying the documents. Schematics of the warehouse, profiles of Vince's men, escape routes highlighted in yellow. "You've thought of everything." "I've tried." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, softened and sharpened all at once. "Melissa, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does," he continued, pulling a key from his pocket and setting it on the desk. "That opens a safety deposit box at First National. Inside you'll find enough money to disappear. New identity, new life, everything you need to start over." Her throat tightened. "I don't want to start over. You might have to. Not without you." The words escaped before she could stop them. They hung in the air, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Dario stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was standing in front of her. So close, she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the way his pupils dilated when he looked at her. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make me believe there's something here worth saving." His voice was rough, almost broken, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. "Because if I start thinking there's a future past this war, I'll lose focus. And if I lose focus, we both die. Maybe there is something worth saving." She reached up, her hand settling against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "Maybe that's what my father saw in you all those years ago. Your father was a better man than me. Maybe. But he trusted you with his life. Maybe I should too." For a long moment, they just stood there. Close enough to kiss, close enough to fall, balanced on the edge of something that terrified them both. The air felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Dario's hand came up, cupping her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "After this is over," he whispered, his voice rough with barely restrained want, "ask me again." "Ask you what?" "If I'm worth saving." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled away, the moment shattering like glass. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went cold. It's Vince. He's moved up the meeting. When? Tomorrow night. He looked at her, and she saw the fear he was trying to hide. This is it, Melissa. One way or another, this ends tomorrow. She nodded, throat too tight to speak, because she knew what he wasn't saying. One of them might not make it out alive, and as she watched him turn back to his plans, jaw set and shoulders tense, she realized with a jolt of clarity that she'd stopped thinking of this as a contract months ago. She'd fallen for him. The man who'd destroyed her life. The man who was trying to save it. The man whose name she wore like armor, and whose protection felt dangerously close to love. And tomorrow she'd find out if that was enough. The warehouse sat 40 miles outside Baton Rouge, hidden behind rusted gates and overgrown weeds that hadn't been cut in years. Dario called it a safe house. Melissa called it a tomb waiting to happen. They'd left the mansion before dawn, taking back roads that twisted through bayou country where fog sat so thick on the water it looked like the earth was breathing. 3 SUVs in convoy. Dario's car in the middle, guards flanking them on both sides. No one spoke. The silence felt like a held breath. Melissa sat in the back seat, the USB drive in her pocket, and a weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She kept replaying last night. The way Dario had looked at her, the way his hand had trembled against her face, the way he'd pulled away before she could close the distance between them. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe whatever this was needed to stay undefined until they survived what came next. If they survived, the warehouse was exactly what she'd expected. Concrete walls, small windows, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry. Inside, it smelled like motor oil and mildew. Dario's men spread out immediately, checking corners, testing locks, establishing perimeters. Military precision. She wondered how many times they'd done this before. Dario led her to a back room that had been converted into something almost livable. A couch, a table, supplies stacked against the wall. A single window overlooked the access road. "We wait here," he said, shrugging off his jacket and checking his weapon. The movement pulled his shirt tight across his shoulders, and she forced herself to look away. "Vince thinks we're meeting at the docks tonight. He'll send someone to confirm I'm not there first. When they report back empty, he'll know I'm on to him. And then he comes here." Dario set the gun on the table, his movements controlled but tense. "This is the only other property he knows about. He'll assume I'm hiding. Are we? We're baiting." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the calculation behind his eyes, the strategy, the willingness to use himself as bait to end this. "I need you to understand something, Melissa. When this starts, it's going to be fast and it's going to be brutal. These aren't men who negotiate. They're men who solve problems with bullets. I know. Do you?" He crossed to her, hands settling on her shoulders, and she felt the heat of him through her shirt. "Because once it starts, there's no going back. You'll see things, do things, and you can't unsee them. My father saw those things." Her voice was steady even though her hands weren't. "He didn't run, neither will I." Something flickered in his expression. Pride, maybe, or fear dressed up as respect. "I know. That's what scares me." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. They're moving. 2 hours, maybe less. The next 90 minutes crawled by like years. Melissa sat on the couch, watching Dario pace the room like a caged animal. He checked his weapon 3 times, tested the window locks twice, spoke in low tones to his men through an earpiece she couldn't hear. Every movement was controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed and released like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. Finally, she stood. "Talk to me." He stopped pacing. "About what?" "Anything. Everything." She crossed to him, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his face. "Tell me something true." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he exhaled, and some of the armor fell away. "I built a kingdom on my father's sins. Spent 5 years trying to wash the blood off, and all I did was paint over it. Your father tried to burn it down because he knew that's what it deserved. And I killed him for it. You didn't." "I did." His voice was raw. "Maybe not with my own hands, but I let Vince operate unchecked. I trusted him when I should have been watching. I chose loyalty over truth, and your father paid the price." He turned away, hands braced against the wall. "So don't tell me I'm worth saving, Melissa, because the only thing I'm good at is destroying everything I touch." She moved without thinking, closing the distance between them, her hand settling on his back. He flinched but didn't pull away. "My father didn't die thinking you were a monster," she said quietly. "He died thinking you were someone worth saving. And maybe he was right. Maybe you just needed someone to believe in you long enough for you to believe in yourself." Dario turned, and the look in his eyes made her chest ache. Made her want to pull him close and never let go. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make me think there's still something in me worth keeping. Because there is." She reached up, her hand settling against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "I've seen it. In the way you talk about your father. In the way you protect your men. In the way you knelt at my father's grave like it mattered. It did matter." "I know." Her voice cracked. "That's why I'm still here." They stood there, inches apart, the air between them electric and impossible. His hand came up, cupping her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. She could feel his breath, warm against her skin, could see the war in his eyes, want versus control, need versus fear. Then the window exploded. Glass shattered inward, and Dario threw himself over her, taking them both to the ground as gunfire erupted. The sound was deafening, rapid cracks that made her ears ring, and her heart slam against her ribs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of him covering her and the heat of his body pressed against hers. "Stay down!" he shouted over the noise, already moving, grabbing his weapon from the table. But she couldn't stay down. Not when she heard his men shouting outside. Not when she saw shadows moving past the broken window. Not when she realized they were surrounded. Dario fired through the window. 3 precise shots that dropped someone she couldn't see. Then he was pulling her toward the back wall, away from the glass, his hand iron tight around her wrist. "There's a door behind the supply shelf," he said, voice clipped and controlled despite the chaos. "It leads to a tunnel. You go through it, you come out a 1/4 mile down the road. There's a car waiting. I'm not leaving you. Melissa." "No." She wrenched her arm free, grabbing the second gun he'd left on the table. "You don't get to protect me by dying. We both walk out, or neither of us does." His eyes blazed with fury and something else. Something that looked dangerously like pride. "You don't know how to use that. Then teach me fast." Another volley of gunfire. The doorframe splintered. One of Dario's men went down hard, blood spreading across the concrete floor. Melissa's stomach lurched, but she didn't look away. Couldn't afford to. Dario grabbed her hand, guiding it to the gun's grip. "Safety's off. Aim center mass. Don't think. Just shoot." His eyes locked on hers, intense and burning. "And stay behind me." They moved together, backs against the wall, toward the door. Outside, she could hear engines, multiple vehicles, more men than they'd prepared for. Vince hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to end this. The door burst open. 3 men stormed through, weapons raised. Dario fired twice, both men dropped. The third aimed at him, finger tightening on the trigger. Melissa didn't think. She raised the gun, aimed like he'd shown her, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed through her arms. The sound felt like it split her skull open, but the man went down, eyes wide with shock, blood blooming across his chest. She'd killed him. The gun fell from her hands, clattering against the concrete. She couldn't stop staring at the body, at the way his fingers twitched once and then went still, at the spreading pool of red that looked too bright to be real. "Melissa." Dario's hands were on her face, forcing her to look at him. "Stay with me. You did what you had to do. You hear me? You did what you had to do." She nodded, but she couldn't feel her hands. Couldn't feel anything except the echo of the gunshot and the weight of what she'd done. Then she saw the blood on Dario's shirt. "You're hit." He glanced down, almost surprised. "It's nothing. You're bleeding. I've had worse." But his face had gone pale, and when he moved, she saw him favor his left side. "We need to go, now." They made it through the back door and into the tunnel. A narrow concrete passage that smelled like earth and rot. Behind them, gunfire still echoed. Ahead, darkness and the promise of escape. Halfway through, Dario stumbled. Melissa caught him, her arm around his waist, feeling the warmth of blood seeping through his shirt. "How bad?" "Bad enough." His voice was tight with pain. "Keep moving." They emerged into twilight, the sun setting over the bayou, turning the water gold and red like it was on fire. The car was there, engine running, door open. One of Dario's men at the wheel, face grim. "Hospital," Melissa said, helping Dario into the back seat. "No hospitals." Dario's hand caught hers, his grip weak but insistent. "They'll be watching. We go to the estate. You need a doctor." "I have one." He leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closing. "I have you." The words hit her harder than the gunfire had. She pressed her hand against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, feeling his life pulse warm and wet against her palm. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered. His eyes opened, finding hers in the dim light. "Now you owe me a life." "I know." His hand came up, touching her face, leaving a smear of blood across her cheek. "Worth it." Then his eyes closed, and she couldn't tell if he was breathing. The estate's medical room looked like something out of a private hospital. Sterile white walls, equipment that beeped and hummed, supplies organized with military precision. Dario's doctor, a woman named Sophia, who asked no questions and worked with steady hands, had spent 3 hours extracting the bullet and stitching him back together. Now, 48 hours later, Melissa sat beside his bed, watching him sleep and trying not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything. She hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man she'd killed. Saw the way his body had jerked when the bullet hit. Saw the blood spreading across the concrete like spilled paint. She'd taken a life. And the worst part, the part that made her sick with shame, was that she didn't regret it. Because that man would have killed Dario. Would have killed her. And she'd do it again if she had to. Maybe that made her a monster too. The USB drive sat on the bedside table, next to the glass of water where she'd placed the dried white rose. She'd been going through the files again, looking for something she'd missed. Some piece of evidence that would make sense of the chaos. And she'd found it. The final file, the one buried deepest in her father's folders, was a video journal. Dated 3 days before he died. She pressed play, and her father's face filled the screen. He looked tired, older than she remembered. But his eyes were steady as he spoke directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it means Vince Rinaldi finally caught up with me." He exhaled slowly. "I need you to know the truth, sweetheart. About Dario. About what really happened 13 years ago." Melissa's hands shook as she turned up the volume. Dario didn't know about the trafficking. "I spent weeks gathering evidence, and everything pointed to Vince operating independently, using Dario's shipping routes without his knowledge, building his own empire inside Dario's organization." Her father leaned closer to the camera. "I tried to tell Dario, showed him the manifests, but Vince intercepted me before I could give him everything. And 3 days later, they burned my shop with me in it." The video cut to another clip. Shaky footage recorded from a distance. The same warehouse from the attack. But this time, the date stamp read 13 years ago. Vince walked into frame. Behind him, 2 men dragged someone. Her father, bloodied and bound. They threw him into a container. Vince said something, smiled, then locked the door. Then he lit the match. Melissa's stomach lurched. She watched through tears as smoke poured from the container, as her father's screams echoed through the speakers, as Vince walked away like he'd just taken out the trash. The video ended. The room spun. Melissa sat back, chest heaving, hands pressed over her mouth to keep from screaming. Dario hadn't known, hadn't sanctioned it, hadn't even been there. 13 years of blame, and she'd aimed it at the wrong man. "How long have you been watching that?" She jumped. Dario was awake, propped up against the pillows, his face pale but his eyes clear. "Long enough." Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me Vince acted alone?" "Because I didn't know for sure until you found those files." He shifted, wincing. "I suspected. But suspicion isn't proof. And I wasn't going to defend myself with maybes when your father was dead because of my organization. It wasn't your fault. It was my empire, my responsibility. He looked at the screen, at the paused image of her father's face. Fault doesn't matter when the outcome's the same. Melissa closed the laptop, setting it aside. I'm sorry. For what? For blaming you. For hating you. For... She stopped, throat tight. For not seeing you clearly until it was almost too late. You had every right to hate me. Maybe. But I don't anymore. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I can't. Not after everything. His thumb traced circles over her knuckles. The same gentle touch from before, but weighted with something heavier now. What are you going to do with that video? She'd been asking herself the same question for hours. The video was proof, evidence that could clear Dario's name and bury Vince's. But it was also leverage, power, the kind of weapon that could shift the balance between them. Trust or survival, love or strategy. I don't know yet, she said finally. Something flickered in his expression. Hurt, maybe, or resignation. You should use it. Give it to the FBI. Let them handle Vince. And expose your entire operation in the process? If that's what it takes. He squeezed her hand. I told you I'd burn it all down to keep you safe. I meant it. I don't want you to burn anything down. She stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the garden in shades of gold and shadow. I want Vince to pay. But I want you to survive it. Those might not be compatible goals. Then we make them compatible. She turned back to him, and for the first time since the warehouse, she felt something like clarity. We use the video, but we do it smart. We leak it to the right people. Make sure Vince goes down without taking you with him. That's risky. Everything about this is risky. She crossed back to the bed, sitting on the edge. But I'm tired of playing defense. Vince has been hunting us since this started. Maybe it's time we hunt him back. Dario studied her. This girl who'd walked into his world with nothing but grief and anger, who'd survived gunfire and guilt and was still standing, who'd killed for him and refused to leave him, and was offering him redemption wrapped in strategy. When did you get so ruthless? He asked softly. When I realized mercy doesn't work on monsters. She picked up the white rose, studying its dried petals. My father tried mercy, tried doing things the right way, and they burned him alive for it. She set the rose back down beside the gun. Sophia had left it there, cleaned and loaded. I won't make the same mistake. Melissa, I'm not saying we become like them. She met his eyes, but I'm saying we stop pretending the rules apply when they never did. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. Okay. We do it your way. He shifted, sitting up despite the pain. But we do it together. No more secrets. No more protecting each other by hiding things. Deal. She extended her hand and he shook it. Formal, absurd, exactly what they needed. Then she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative. Just desperate and honest and too long coming. His hand came up, threading through her hair, pulling her closer even though it had to hurt. She could taste blood and antiseptic, and something underneath that was just him. Cedar and smoke and promises neither of them knew how to keep. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. After this is over. Don't. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't make promises about after. Let's just survive first. And then? And then we figure out what this is. She pulled back, standing. But right now we have a monster to kill. She picked up the laptop and left the room. The white rose and the gun still sitting side by side on the table like a prayer and a threat. Behind her, she heard Dario whisper something she almost didn't catch. I love you. She stopped, heart hammering, wanting to turn back. But she didn't. Because if she said it back, if she admitted what had been building since the cemetery, it would make losing him impossible to survive. And they weren't done fighting yet. The docks looked exactly like they had 13 years ago. Same rusted cranes, same stacked containers, same smell of salt and diesel that made the air thick enough to taste. Melissa stood at the entrance, rain soaking through her jacket, and felt like she was standing in her father's ghost. This was where he'd died. Where Vince had locked him in a container and burned him alive. where everything had started, and where it would end. You shouldn't be here. Dario's voice came through the earpiece, low and tense. He was positioned 100 yards away with 4 of his men, watching the meeting point. This wasn't the plan. Plans change. Melissa kept walking, boots splashing through puddles. You said Vince would come if he thought I was vulnerable, so here I am. Melissa. He killed my father here. I deserve to watch him die here. Her voice was steady, even though her hands weren't. The gun felt heavy in her jacket pocket, the recording device heavier. Trust me. Silence. Then, I do. That's what scares me. She reached the meeting point. A cleared area between 2 rows of containers. Overhead lights flickered, casting everything in sickly yellow. The rain had picked up, drumming against metal loud enough to mask footsteps. Perfect cover for an ambush. She didn't have to wait long. Vince emerged from between containers, flanked by 6 men with weapons drawn. He looked different than he had at Dario's office. Less polished, more desperate, like a man who knew his empire was crumbling and was willing to burn everything to stay on top. Melissa Myers. He smiled, but it was all teeth. The mechanic's daughter, you've caused me a lot of trouble, girl. Good. She kept her hands visible, empty. I hope I caused more than trouble. Oh, you did. He moved closer, circling her like a predator. Cost me contracts, alliances. Made Dario suspicious when he should have stayed loyal. All because you couldn't leave the past buried. My father's past, the one you buried him in. Vince stopped. He told you. He didn't have to. I found the video. She pulled out her phone, holding it up. The paused image showed Vince lighting the match. You burning my father alive. All of it recorded. His expression went flat. Dangerous. Give me the phone. No. I wasn't asking. He nodded to his men. They moved forward, weapons raised. I wouldn't. Melissa's voice carried over the rain. Because if anything happens to me, this video goes straight to the FBI, along with every file my father compiled about your trafficking operation. Shipping manifests, financial records, names of every politician you've bought, all of it. Vince's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Try me. For 5 long seconds, no one moved. Then Vince laughed. Sharp, bitter. You think you're smart. Think you've got leverage. But you're just a poor girl playing games in a world that eats people like you. Maybe. But I'm still standing. She took a step closer. My father stood up to you too. And you killed him because you knew he was right. Because you knew Dario would have ended you if he'd found out what you were doing. Your father was a fool. Thought he could be a hero. Thought saving Dario made him special. Vince's voice dripped venom. But he died screaming in a metal box while I listened. And you know what? He begged at the end. Begged me to spare him. To think about you. Melissa's vision blurred red. What did you say? He cried for you. Called your name. Tell Melissa I'm sorry. Over and over until the smoke took him. Vince smiled. Pathetic. She didn't think. Just moved. The gun was in her hand, safety off, aimed at his chest before his men could react. Say that again. Melissa, wait. Dario's voice in her ear, urgent. But she wasn't waiting. Not anymore. My father died a hero. You're just a coward who burns people because you can't beat them fair. Her finger tightened on the trigger. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Vince's hand moved toward his weapon. Gunfire erupted. But not from her gun. From behind the containers. Dario and his men, closing in, cutting off escape routes. Vince's men scattered, returning fire, and the docks exploded into chaos. Melissa dove behind a container, ears ringing. Bullets pinged off metal. Someone screamed. The rain turned the ground slick with water and blood. She'd lost sight of Vince. Then hands grabbed her from behind, spinning her around. Vince's face, twisted with rage, his gun pressed under her chin. Drop it, he snarled. She did. The gun clattered to the ground. I should have killed you the night you went to the cemetery. Should have finished what your father started. His breath was hot against her face. But I'm going to enjoy this. Vince. Dario stepped into view, weapon raised, rain streaming down his face. Blood stained his shirt. The wound from the warehouse reopened. but his hand was steady. Let her go. Or what? You'll shoot me? Vince laughed, pressing the gun harder against Melissa's throat. You fire, I fire, she dies either way. Then we both die. Dario's voice was ice. Because the second she drops, you're dead. Dario don't. Melissa started. Vince's grip tightened. Shut up. No. She met Dario's eyes across the rain, soaked space between them. Saw the fear there. The love. The impossible choice. Do it. Melissa. He's going to kill me anyway. At least this way he dies too. She smiled, even though tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Debt paid, remember? Dario's hand shook. I can't. Yes, you can. She looked at Vince. My father died protecting people from monsters like you. I won't dishonor that by begging. Vince's finger started to squeeze the trigger. Melissa threw herself backward, hard, using all her weight to break his grip. The gun went off. Hot pain seared across her shoulder, but she was moving, rolling, grabbing her fallen weapon. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Dario's gun, Vince's gun, hers. Everything went quiet. Melissa looked down. Blood bloomed across her chest. High, near her collarbone. Not fatal. Not yet. Vince lay 3 feet away, eyes wide and empty. 3 bullet wounds, 2 from Dario, 1 from her. Dead before he hit the ground. Melissa! Dario was beside her, hands pressing against the wound, voice breaking. Stay with me. Stay with me. I'm okay. But the world was tilting. Is he? He's dead, he's gone. You're safe. He pulled off his jacket, pressing it against her shoulder. You're safe. Good. Her vision blurred. Did you get it? The recording? Got it. He cupped her face with bloody hands. The whole confession. It's over. Then it was worth it. She smiled, even though breathing hurt. We won. We won. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. But you don't get to die on me. You hear me? You owe me a life, remember? I remember. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Told you I'd survive, she whispered. I know. His voice cracked. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Learned from my father. And taught me something too. What's that? That some debts are worth paying. He kissed her. Soft, desperate. Tasting like rain and blood and promises. No matter the cost. The sirens reached them. Lights flooded the docks. And Melissa closed her eyes, finally letting herself rest. Because the monster was dead. And she was still breathing. Debt paid in full. 6 weeks later, Melissa stood at Cypress Hill Cemetery under a sky so clear it looked painted. The rain had stopped weeks ago, and spring had arrived with the kind of gentle warmth that made even graveyards feel peaceful. Her shoulder ached where the bullet had torn through. The doctors said she'd been lucky. Another inch, and it would have hit an artery. As it was, she'd spent 3 weeks in Dario's private medical wing, healing while the world outside shifted and crumbled and rebuilt itself. The video had done exactly what they'd intended. Leaked to the FBI through Sophia's contacts, it had triggered a federal investigation that tore through Vince's network like wildfire. Politicians resigned. Businessmen fled. 3 trafficking rings collapsed in a single week. And Dario had emerged from the chaos cleaner than he'd entered it. Not innocent. Never innocent. But legitimate enough that the FBI had cut him a deal. Immunity in exchange for testimony against everyone Vince had implicated. His empire survived, restructured, rebuilt on foundations that wouldn't crumble under scrutiny. He'd kept his promise. No more blood money, no more shadow operations. Just real estate and shipping companies that operated in daylight. The city was his again. But different this time. Cleaner. Melissa heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. She knew his walk by now. The slight hesitation on his left side where the wound still bothered him, the controlled grace that came from years of surviving impossible situations. Dario stopped beside her at her father's grave. He was dressed simply. Dark jeans, white shirt, no jacket. Almost unrecognizable from the kingpin who'd knelt here in a suit that cost more than her rent. He held 2 roses, one white, one black. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. I promised your father I'd keep coming. He knelt, laying both roses on the stone with the same reverence he'd shown that rainy night 6 weeks ago. And I keep my promises. Even to dead men. Especially to dead men. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. They're the only ones who can't forgive you if you fail. Melissa studied the roses. White for innocence lost. Black for power reborn. Together they looked like a prayer and a threat. A beginning and an ending. What did you say to him? She asked. That his daughter is safe. That the monster who killed him is dead. That his sacrifice meant something. Dario's voice was quiet. And that I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it stays that way. That's a big promise. I know. He turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. But I've got time. They stood there in silence, the spring breeze moving through the oak trees, birds singing somewhere overhead. The cemetery felt different in daylight, less haunted, more peaceful, like even the dead could rest easy now. The FBI closed the case on my father, Melissa said finally. Officially ruled it a homicide by Vince Rinaldi. They're going to put a marker on his grave. Robert Meyer's hero. He deserves it. He does. Her throat tightened. But he wouldn't have cared about the marker. He would have cared that you kept your word. I know. Dario reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. That's why I did it. They walked together toward the cemetery gates, leaving the roses behind. The sun felt warm on Melissa's face, and for the first time in 13 years, she felt like she could breathe without grief pressing down on her chest. At the gate, Dario stopped. The contract's expired. You're free to go. She'd been expecting this. Had spent 6 weeks knowing this conversation was coming. The contract marriage had served its purpose. Protected her legally, kept her safe while Vince's empire collapsed. She could walk away now. Go back to her apartment, her job at the diner. The life she'd built before a man in a suit had knelt at her father's grave and changed everything. And if I don't want to go? She asked. His expression shifted. Hope warring with fear. Then you stay. As what? As whatever you want. He stepped closer, his free hand cupping her face. My wife. My partner. The woman who saved my life and taught me I was worth saving. His voice dropped. The person I love more than this city, more than this empire, more than my own survival. Melissa's breath caught. You love me. I've loved you since the night you pointed a gun at Vince and refused to back down. Maybe before that. He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. I know it's complicated. I know I'm the reason your father died, even if I didn't pull the trigger. I know you have every reason to walk away, but I'm asking you to stay anyway. She should have needed time to think. Should have weighed the options, considered the risks, remembered all the reasons this was impossible. But she didn't. Because somewhere between the cemetery and the warehouse and the dockside confrontation, she'd stopped thinking of him as the man who'd destroyed her life and started thinking of him as the man who'd helped her rebuild it. I'll stay, she said. On one condition. Anything. Promise me this city won't burn anyone else. Promise me you'll use your power to protect people instead of controlling them. She met his eyes. Promise me you'll be the man my father thought you could be. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. I promise, he whispered into her hair. Every day. For as long as you'll let me. That's a long time. I know. He pulled back just enough to kiss her. Soft and certain and real. I'm counting on it. They walked out of the cemetery hand in hand, leaving the past buried and the future uncertain but shared. Behind them, the white and black roses stood together on Robert Meyer's grave. A symbol of debt paid, of sacrifice honored, of a poor girl and a kingpin who'd found redemption in each other. The rain had stopped, the storms had passed, and for the first time since that night in the rain, Melissa felt like she'd come home. Not to a place, but to a person. The man who'd paid her father's debt in blood and loyalty and impossible love. The man whose name she wore not as armor anymore, but as a promise. That some debts, once paid, become gifts. And some contracts become forever. The city stretched out before them. New Orleans in daylight, vibrant and alive and theirs. Dario's empire, rebuilt from ashes. Melissa's inheritance, earned through survival. Together they would protect it. Together they would make sure it never burned anyone else. Together, they would honor the man who'd saved a stranger in an alley and changed everything. Robert Myers, mechanic. Hero. Father. His debt had been paid in full, and his daughter had finally found her way home. Thank you for watching. I hope their story left a mark, the kind that lingers long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe for more tales of love that shouldn't exist but does anyway. And tell me in the comments, could you forgive the one who destroyed you?